First of all, I just want to say thank you for agreeing to do this, especially now. When we were first scheduling this call, the world was just crazy. It wasn't completely crazy, and the more press time, I don't even know if that's right, that we can offer this discussion, I think the better. It's time to start real conversations about this instead of social media posts. So I appreciate you guys being willing to do it. I highly respect each of you. I think that most of us have had some margin of conversation about this topic privately. Not a ton, because I'm white and I wasn't sure how to bring the topic up. And so, but I think that the days for being uncomfortable about a topic are way, way over. And so I just, about 10 years ago, started really grappling with this subject matter of racism. And I don't have white privilege. Like, I didn't grow up privileged, and what all that actually means. And over the last decade, you guys, among others, have really broadened my viewpoint and helped me see a lot of things about my country, about myself, that I honestly just didn't know. Like, I just grew up, ignorance is bliss, right? And so I just felt like, as I was thinking about who should kind of represent in this conversation, and who I felt like would trust my heart in the conversation as well, was you guys. So thank you for being willing to step into it, and we'll see where this goes. Maybe nowhere. This may be a conversation that only lives on my computer for the rest of days, but we're going to try. We'll see how it goes. All right, friends. Well, let's do a couple of quick introductions and we'll hop in, because I know that Ken has to do dad duty and everybody has stuff to do a little bit, but which you already know this about me, but just so everybody knows, because my family has bounced around a little in the last little bit. I am married to Katie. We have 3 boys. They're all grown. I mean, that's they're all grown. Everybody's at home right now. Thank you, COVID. It's been a nice little reunion of the family members. So that's been nice. We live in the south suburbs of Chicago. I am the central director of student ministries at Parkview Christian Church, which is a larger multi-site church on the south side.
Yeah, my name is Ken, from the Phoenix area, and right now I'm just started a lead pastor position of a church called New Hope. Worked with Darren and Tania and Zorn for a little bit as well at our previous church, and been married for about coming up to 9 years. I guess we have 2 adopted children. If we're talking about race, both of them are Mexican. My wife is white, and then we have 2, if you will, mixed. We don't really see them like that, but that's how it is. And then I am a son of an immigrant family. So my parents, my mom's from Singapore, my dad's from Vietnam.
All righty, my name's Zorn. Nice to see y'all. Tania, good to see you again. All right, hey, okay. Can't get to see y'all. I am from Cincinnati. Moved to Phoenix when I probably about 7 years ago. I'm a musician. I play on the road quite a bit. That's my full-time job. And then I've been at churches in Arizona. Started as a house drummer at Mission. Then I went to being whatever I was at Cornerstone, several things in one. We'll just the gamut, the whole deal. Found my way leading several departments there, and then transitioned myself now back to being on the road quite a bit. And just am starting something with my friend Anthony Montana right now, so we'll see what happens with that. But other than that, nice. I'm married to Emery. Married to Emery. I have a daughter named Zamara who's 4, and my wife is pregnant right now, so 1 more on the way. Life is good. I was just gonna say that Tania is the truth. She's my homie, and if you give her space, she's gonna drop bombs on this video. video, so be ready.
I'm counting on it. All right, Tania, how about you? Don't drop bombs yet, but in a minute.
I was like, no pressure. That's fine. Well, I was born in the Bahamas, and my parents are immigrants. Of course, we moved here together. I am currently a master's student pursuing that. I work at a church as a director with guest services. I'm an only child, so I've walked through a lot of things solo, which only makes you stronger, so that's good. But that's kind of the sum of me in a very brief statement.
Awesome. Danette?
I'm Danette Maddie and been married for going on 32 years. And my husband has in the past been in full-time ministry. Now he's in the marketplace. And with his encouragement, I'm going on my 10th year in full-time ministry at a church. It's ironic that I had to come to Nebraska to get into a multicultural church. But I found out later it's because we were at the time one of 10 refugee resettlement cities in the nation at that time. Because I'm like, where's all this color coming from? This is Nebraska. But it is a wonderfully diverse church for Nebraska. I'll qualify that. But I was in the military for almost 8 years. And my role currently is discipleship. I'm helping with the discipleship team, small groups, growth track, baptism, et cetera, and grew up in California. Dad's Black, mom was half white and half Indian. And so, yes, we called ourselves mixed. You know, other kids did some other name calling, but we called ourselves mixed. And I'll show my age. I'm old school. And so, my mom told me to be proud to be Black. So I was always Black. And that was just me. So I wasn't the old school colored, and I wasn't the new school African American. I said, Black has one syllable. I'll take it. So it's just easier on me. But so I'm really grateful, Darren. Thanks for doing this. This is how good conversations start, when somebody has the guts to start them.
I hope so. Nadeem, how about you?
No, my name is Nadeem, and I live here in Southern California. I married to Brandy, coming up on 16 years, have 4 boys. 14's the oldest, 6 is the youngest. House is crazy busy, so if you guys hear somebody yelling or something smashing in the background, it's probably coming from my house. But much like you, Ken, I'm a son to immigrant parents. I'm the first one in my whole family born in the U.S. They came over from Lebanon in the early 80s. So been here in Southern California ever since. Looking forward to this. Thanks so much for putting this together, Darren.
Yeah, well, like I said, I appreciate you guys being willing to have the conversation. Our country has had just a lot of unrest, a lot of frustration coming from lots of different communities. And as a white person, I know that I don't fully understand all of it. I understand enough of it to know that what I'm seeing, I should not be seeing. And I just felt like it was time to have a good conversation with my friends about what it's like to not grow up white in this country. I believe that my experience in America, I have assumed forever was everyone's experience in America. And as racial tensions rose and we started seeing incidents across our country years ago, I felt like, well, those are isolated. I mean, I've never seen that happen. That's an isolated incident. And I feel like Will Smith's quote about racism isn't getting worse, it's getting filmed, just was such a punch to me. I was like, that's true. This is not getting worse. It's not an isolated incident. It's happening everywhere to everyone I know. And I just didn't know that. And so thank you guys for being willing to step into the conversation. I love that we're representing a lot of different cultures in this conversation. And I want you guys to have the freedom to just speak as freely as you want. So thank you for jumping in on this. Let's start this way. Let's everybody just quickly share kind of your cultural heritage, and then if you want to add on to that, some stories that you think might give us some context for who you are and how you grew up in America. I would love that. So, Tania, let's start with you because I can see my screen and you guys can't. I'll just call you out for this part and then we'll jump in. If you wanna piggyback on anything that anyone else is saying, click your button and let's go. All right. So Tania, you're up. Tell us a little bit.
So, as I mentioned before, I was born in the Bahamas, which means that I grew up in a culture that was predominantly Black. And a lot of the government systems, a lot of authorities, everything was just like Black. Even our flag is blue, black, and yellow. And in school, I remember them saying like Black is for the people, so, or a representation of the people. So that being a reference point, moving into the US as an immigrant and as a foreigner was a hard transition. So I know that like my backstory, because it didn't start from birth and it came with a different reference, is different from somebody else who grew up from birth in America. But for me, that transition of understanding, the small transition of being different was a little bit rough because I moved here when I was in 5th grade. And like you're normally bullied when you're in school, so that's fine. But I had like such a thick accent when I moved here, and I was bullied so hard for that accent. And I, to the point where I started watching TV aggressively. Like I watched The Golden Girls and I watched Friends, and I just watched so many things to like speak differently until I reached a point where my accent was lost. And like my mom still has an accent, and to this day I'm really sad about that I pushed myself into losing a part of my culture because I just wanted to fit in. But that kind of played into me just trying to adapt and figure out my place, and adapting to very different stereotypes that I'd never experienced before. That took a very long time for me to kind of even realize were stereotypes and not just weird coincidences. I feel like I can definitely keep going in that portion, but I
want you to.
There. Okay.
Yeah, unpack that a little bit. And also, let me just say, it literally, again, it's just this is just difference, right? It never dawned on me that anyone would have to give up and I feel like accents are natural.
Yeah.
Like they're just who you are, and you don't train them out of yourself.
Yeah.
And wow, I'm sorry that you had to do that or felt like you had to do that.
I think like the funniest, an interesting thing about that is that I didn't have that regret until adulthood, because I still was so much like, oh, well, I lost it. It's good. There's no reason for me to keep introducing myself or for me to keep having to say like, oh, I'm a foreigner. And a part of it in 5th grade happened because I had a teacher who was very anti-immigrant, which was very hard to kind of adapt to. So she used to like throw my homework assignment across the room, and it created the culture where to everybody else in the classroom, I was the weakest link, if that makes sense. Like I was the person to pick on, because who are they going to complain to? The teacher? She's instigating it. So
she's starting it. Yeah.
Right. And she's clearly saying it's okay. So a part of that was me being like, okay, clearly they can tell I'm a foreigner because of my accent. So I have to get rid of that. It'll make my life a whole lot easier. And then I just think of like school, because that was a big transition for a kid coming here. That's your first real introduction to like American society, is the kids around you, the people that you talk to, and understanding those, like I said, the stereotypes that I thought were coincidences, where people often were like, oh, wow, that's so great that you, like you speak really well, or you are just so interested in such interesting things. I didn't know that. And like, I've always been a quiet kid, or like an introverted person, especially as a kid. I was even more like, introverted. Even in the Bahamas, like when I was in school, my best friend was a security guard, which is not great when you're like 8, but it was true. We're great friends. But I learned that like, oh, that's just my personality and that's fine. But the more I kind of met people and the more I met people from different cultures, I didn't find a place that I fit because I didn't realize the stereotypes were following me. So I wasn't like super brazen, which is associated often with Black women, that like we're loud, we're boisterous, we're super joyous. We want to be the life of the party, it's great if that's natural to your personality, but when it's not, and then people kind of assuming that you're fake or false or trying to personify something that you're not, and constantly being questioned because you're just quiet and you want to sit there, is something that I've kind of had to deal with. And I had to question, like, once again, like, is this like my accent? Is this something that I need to change? Do I need to be like bolder? Do I need to be brighter? Do I need to jump out? And each time feeling like, that's not me, that's not comfortable. And if I showcase that, it's going to feel fake. It's going to feel forced. So just kind of moving into a space of adulthood, of sitting down and questioning, like, what are some of the things that I'm pushing out of myself that aren't real because I'm trying to make other people feel comfortable about something that has nothing to do with me. And that's kind of been a snippet of my experience growing up.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Nadim, you said, I feel like you said your parents were also immigrants.
Yeah.
So just tell us a little bit about your experience and your American experience.
Yeah, so I was relatively young coming over here. We moved over here in the summer of '83. Honestly, the even the title of an immigrant child is probably more suited for my brother and my sisters. They had a more difficult time adjusting to the norms. They came over, were put into school right away, whereas I had some lead time to kind of adjust to the culture. Even where I grew up here in South Orange County, it was okay to be different. It felt more of a melting pot of sorts, where there's a large Hispanic population here in Orange County in general, Southern California in general, and so people knew that I wasn't necessarily born here. I wasn't American by nature, I guess, that I had come over from Lebanon. And honestly, all things considered, it was a pretty easy transition for me. I was young. I don't even remember much of it. And I don't mean to say this in a way to, I guess, belittle other people's experiences, but I remember as a child, my biggest gripe was, Mom, can you give me a bologna and cheese sandwich because the kids are making fun of what I'm bringing to school? Like that was the depth of the hurt that I felt because I was Lebanese, because she would make me this, and if I could give you guys these sandwiches, they're amazing, but she would make me these Lebanese sandwiches that I could bring with me to school to eat. And everybody's like, what is that? That doesn't look good. That doesn't look like what we have. That was really the extent of any feeling that I had of being different. So my upbringing, all things considered, were pretty, it was pretty easy. Now, as I got older, that changed a little bit. Came across some experiences, but that's probably for something later on in the show. But as a child coming over, it was a pretty easy transition for me.
Great, thanks. Zoran, tell us a little bit about you.
It's funny because I feel like I can really articulate my experience now that all this has started to happen. So I moved out of the hood, or whatever you want to call it, at a young age because of my mom's success. My mom became the first African-American vice president in Cincinnati of a company. So that moved me to Westchester, which is pretty much an all-white community. And I was, not even realizing it now, definitely a pilgrimage of one of the first African-Americans to move in that community. I remember first through No, sorry, even earlier than, or later than that. Let's just say 5th through 10th grade, I was one of 3 Black kids in that school, in the Lakota school district. And now that I've left and I'm an adult, there's a lot more there than there was. But I definitely was a pilgrimage. And that was, on the one hand, my mom was successful. She was growing in her career, and obviously surrounded by all white males in suits. And this was a woman, one, an African-American woman, two, which, we used to call it the double negative, that be successful. So my drive is really ridiculous, my friends would say, just because I've watched her do that. And I think that I didn't realize what was happening around me. Like Tania would say, I just would fit in. So I was the stereotypical African-American, loud. If I'm mad, you're going to hear me all the way down the hallway. If I'm happy, you're going to hear me all the way down the hallway. I think that the school teachers didn't know what to do with it, and I was being myself, but I was different in the regards that I didn't act like and be like everybody else. So yeah, that just set me up for a whole lot of experiences that I don't think that I was really catching. And now when I look back, I see it. And me being one out of, again, I'm 2 out of, Lakota is thousands of kids in this school. It's so big that they had to split up the high school. So there's 1,000 kids at Lakota East, 1,000 kids at Lakota West. And by the time I graduated, I'm one of maybe 5 or 6, right? Well, we'll just say 15 to be lucky. So we're outnumbered by many. And I think some of the other kids in my school knew how to keep their identity. I, like Tania, kept shifting. I was a chameleon, and I shifted to what group I was in. So real big identity crisis as I was growing up of, do I want to be with the white kids and listen to rock and roll? And if you listen, I'm a musician. So if you listen to my music repertoire, you'll really know it's rap, it's country, and that's all a phase of me growing up and hitting different groups. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ken, talk to us about your experience. You're also the son of immigrants. Tell us a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. Son of immigrants and everything, and especially going to school was always different because, you grow up and you learn about what culture is according to home, and then you go to school and it doesn't really reflect what you learn. And so there's always been what I like to call kind of what Zoran said, an identity crisis in a sense. Like, wait, what does that mean? And even, especially since everything's been happening, my brother and I have really been reflecting upon what does it look like? Why do we do certain things? Or why do we have, like my brother and I even had a rule growing up. We said, hey, we don't wear anything Chinese on our shirts or any dragons on our shirts. And we realized, it's because we wanted to fit in with everybody else. And we didn't want to be outcasted. I'm taller than most people, than most other Chinese people. And it's interesting because there was a time where I said, man, I'm too white to be Chinese to be accepted, and I'm too Chinese to be white. So there was definitely been an identity crisis just really growing up. And so I guess through all that, just really been exploring, man, what is it? Why do I think this? Or why do people say this? Just the other day, and my friend's gonna hate that I brought this up, but my buddy just said, man, you're like an Asian Michael Jordan. And in my head, I'm like, wait, if someone were to call you Michael Jordan, you wouldn't say, hey, you're a white Michael Jordan. You just say Michael Jordan. Why do you have to add Asian to there? So just little nuances there that I really started picking up just over the years of my trying to discover where my identity is and just some of the nuances of what makes culture. So, but kind of like Nadim, it's, I feel like my childhood, especially compared to people of color, if you will, or just wasn't in a sense as even privileged, if you will, and I think that's why, actually I just posted this earlier to see if it was confirmed or not, but when we're talking about race and all the things that's happening, I said, man, isn't it crazy that that if you're an immigrant, that it seems like you have more opportunities than Black people in America. That's how far back just kind of that culture, in a sense, has been oppressed. So, and that's what I kind of see right now as well.
Yeah, good, Ken. Thank you. Danette, best for last. Tell us a little bit about you.
Only half of that statement is true. But when I was a little girl, one of my most stark memories, as it connects with my identity or my cultural identity, was coming home from school and asking my mom, and I don't know how young I was, but as I said, my dad is Black, and my mom, who has since passed, she was half white and half Choctaw Indian. And I remember coming home from school and saying, Mom, the kids at school keep saying, what are you? And she asked me, well, what do you say? And I say, well, I'm human. and then they say, no, what are you? And she said, so then what do you say? Well, I said, I'm a girl. And I honestly did not know what they were talking about it. So my mom, I think she realized she needed to help me out. And years later, I would thank her because she simply said, well, honey, in America, and keep in mind, my parents were divorced, so I didn't have my dad growing up. We're good friends now, but I didn't really know him well growing up, had a few visits here and there. But she just said, honey, in America, when you're 1/16 Black, you're Black. And so when the kids ask you, where are you, it's okay to say, I'm Black, and I want you to always be proud of that. And that was significant because she could have legitimately said, well, you can say you're half and half and you're mixed, and and I would learn that later. She was not ashamed. She had some shame of her white heritage, for all kinds of reasons. But I had mixed friends, and we called ourselves mixed in high school and junior high, because I'm from California, grew up in Hollywood when I was little, and then got shuffled around. I lived with an auntie one year in Sacramento. I lived with my Nana several years in Fresno, and that's where I graduated from. But that was significant, and I thanked her later because so many of my friends who were biracial, their white parent had, if there was a divorce or there was anything negative about the marriage, then they might badmouth their father. My mom always talked my dad up, which I appreciated. And a significant instance, this is so small and so simple, but you guys will all understand this, this would have been the late 60s, and I was in 3rd grade. And I remember this little white girl, one of my little buddies, she goes, Danette, you gotta come meet Mr. Brown. Come on. And I said, okay. So you come into the classroom, and I see this tall, nice looking Black man in a suit and tie, which struck me because even at that young age, I recognized that he was not the janitor or the security guard or the hobo on the street that lived in
Wow.
around the back alley. And so it was like a celebrity sighting. And I looked up at him, and my little friend said, Mr. Brown, this is Danette, she's colored. And he was so sweet, and he looked down and he said, we don't say colored, we say Black. And she goes, oh, okay, well, this is Danette, she's Black. And he looked down at me and he said, it's very nice to meet you. And we had just had a nice conversation, and that made such an impact on me because he would be the first, shall we say, professional Black man that I would ever see. Now, my father was worked at a credit union in a suit and tie for 30 years, but I didn't know that until later. So it just had an impact on me in that, and coming up in Fresno, like Nadine, strong Hispanic population, and very multicultural. So, irony of ironies, I live with my white grandmother, who's actually a bigot, but she loved my dad. She loved him. Black neighbors across the street, love them. American Indian man married to a white woman on the other corner, love them. But I would hear her racist remarks at home, not extreme, but enough, and a few times is enough for a little mixed kid. But she certainly loved me. So I talk about identity crisis. I really appreciate that a couple of you have used that phrase, but because I had it in spades. And like Zorin, I had friends of all different cultures, and I saw the joy of that, and it also enabled me to see racism from everywhere. So it was interesting when I would show up, because I got shuffled around a bit, and I would show up at a new school, and of course this left its mark on me. That it was mostly I'd be the new kid standing in the playground, and it would be the black girls that would go, hey girl, and I'd look around. Yeah, you come here. And they would just engage me and take me under their wings. And it's not that I didn't have white friends. I would make friends of all stripes, but it was the first time I ever recognized what later I would hear the phrase, "We know our own." And I certainly wasn't ashamed of my white and half Indian mom. So I would say, if people would say, I learned to say, yeah, my mom's, white and my dad's black, and but I certainly made an impact on me to see that it was the black girls that would go, hey, come here, come over here, and take me under their wing. Isn't that interesting?
Fascinating. Yeah, totally. I grew up in the Midwest, and I'll be perfectly honest. I'm pretty sure we had one black kid in my school. We all loved him. I didn't refer to him as my black friend. I also had no clue that his culture would be different from mine. I was clueless, totally clueless. But I mean, I grew up all white, and not racist white, just white. And this notion, it has struck me recently, because as we've talked about this among ourselves, several of you have said, it was mostly fine. Like it really, I didn't have the experience that some people have. And I'll be honest, I'm bothered by that, because I feel like any experience is too much of an experience. Like Ken shared a story with me where somebody had said, you should go back to China or something like that. And I'm appalled by that. And one of the questions that I asked you guys to think about was like, what racism is okay? Like what racism is like not bad enough? To me, it's just all horrific, and I don't understand it. So anyway, I digress. So here's a little bit of what I want to hear from you guys. Like, I didn't grow up in this culture at all, in any culture other than the one that I know. And I definitely didn't grow up where I felt like I had to change who I was to fit in, or abandon parts of my heritage so that people would accept me. And as I hear you guys talk, like that's heartbreaking to me. And also is very eye-opening about why there might be so much frustration in our country right now, beyond the obvious, right? So I think that most people can look at the victimization, the violence that's happening, perpetrated against people of all colors, but especially against our black friends, and go, that's appalling, that's horrific. I hope they are. But I feel like most of us don't recognize the subtle racism, that where I feel like that kind of stuff starts. Tania had told me a story once about walking into Target, and the lady who was standing there in Target grabbed her purse and pulled it up closer. And I'm stunned by stuff like that. So I feel like racism starts slow, right? It starts small like that. And you guys who've all experienced that have even said, but it wasn't that bad. And I just want to talk a little bit about, honestly, what's not that bad. What's not that bad look like? Because I feel like if we can help people understand that those are the moments where we have to crush this, that's what prevents us from going down the lane that we're in right now. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I don't even know how to direct that as a question. So somebody help me with that. Also, Who knew that the sun was going to set where it always sets and totally destroy where I'm sitting right now? Sorry, guys. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I just feel like it's the little stuff. It's that stuff, that is where we have to change our thinking. I mean, I think we have to change our thinking in a lot of places, but that one's bothering me. It's bothering me that I feel like you guys are saying, well, it wasn't that bad. I feel like you should be incensed by that. I'm incensed by it. So help me with that.
When you're, I think I'm going to stretch here. When you're outnumbered, you are, and I don't want to say forced, but I want to say conditioned to absorb what's happening around you. I mean, you're going to fight a losing battle if it's you versus, like in my situation, you versus 1,000 kids. And my mom's success got me to maybe a better opportunity of a school. But at the same time, I don't get to raise havoc because I'm in the lunch line and somebody says, oh, look, it's a reverse Oreo. If I raise havoc, it's me versus all the other kids who grew up maybe a certain way. Does that make sense? So I'm not now. For me, it is bad, and it's always been bad. But the question is, at what point are we allowed to speak up, right? Because let's say it is bad. I go and I speak up. Guess who I'm going to meet? My white assistant principal. It doesn't stop there. Guess who I'm going to meet? My white principal. It don't stop there. Guess who I'm going to meet? The white superintendent. Now, I'm not saying that every person in that line is racist, but somebody in that line may have grown up a different way, and now it's going to be a fight to get to the real, right? Well, Johnny didn't mean it. He doesn't know what he doesn't know, which reminds me of where we at today. It was just one bad apple in the seed, but yet we keep continuing to be in a book of inequality and racism, and the book ain't closed. Just like we are right now. Ferguson happened, riots happen, all of the same stuff happened. Guess what? Smoothed right over, right back to square one. Nothing changed, right?
Yeah.
So do we want the same mentality of, oh, it wasn't that bad? No, it was that bad. And you're right. It starts with the little stuff. But I guess the better question is, not every person in our situations have the ability to have many of us around them to raise the flag. Schools didn't look 50-50. Depends on where you grew up, right? Same thing on the other end. Let me just be the other end. A white person that maybe receive it in an all-black school, Princeton. When do they raise the flag? But we're talking about what we're talking about today, which is this. I couldn't raise the flag as much because I'm the only one of two there. So what am I going to do? Cuddle up with two guys, and then we're going to go all the way down the line to do what? Maybe get a slap on the hand. It's not going to be that serious because it's going to just be, that was just a bad apple. Let's move on. Right? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Anybody else want to throw in on that?
I mean, I feel that as well. Around for me, I really felt it after 9/11. Actually, I would say from when 9/11 happened till maybe 7 or 8 years ago, where you step on a plane. Now, I've never been stopped by TSA or been, had to be wanted because I had, they felt I was suspicious or anything like that. But there was a period when I was with Simple Youth Ministry, and Darren, I would fly out to meet up with you and Danette at whatever conference we were going to. It felt like every plane I went on, somebody was being pulled off. And you do want to stand up for that person. You do want to stand up and say, hey, this guy wasn't saying what he was saying, or he wasn't looking suspicious or something like that. But same thing, when you're looking around the plane and you're outnumbered, you almost can't speak up because of that bad seed, that bad apple. I read an article this morning. I think it was in the LA Times that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar wrote, and his perspective was eye-opening. He says, you know, for a white family to see what's happening on TV right now and to hear about this injustice, and they're like, oh man, that stinks. That's awful. That's horrible. But then there's a black family who's looking at the same thing and they get irate over it. Now, should it result in looting? I don't know. I'm not in that space to say it's right or wrong. But the anger is justified because when you look at your kids and you say, my kid could just be walking to his buddy's house and tensions are high, and for whatever reason they get stopped and they get beaten or they get killed or this, that, and the other. That's why in his article, that's why he said that's the difference between a white home and a black home. Is a white person can go out for a walk and not have to worry about that. A black person may send their kids out or may go to the store themselves, and they're the ones that are going to be potentially on the news. You know what I mean? And reading that, for me, even as an Arab American, that's mind-boggling. That's baffling.
Yeah, I read a story today about a man who said, I never, ever walk in my neighborhood unless I'm walking with my daughter, because then I'm a dad. I'm not just
Right.
a black man. And I just have so little context for what that even feels like. And I'm heartbroken that anybody even has to think that. You know, we had a conversation in our church. Our pastor had a conversation with several people involving all this so that we can understand better what we can do, which eventually we'll get to that part of this conversation. Like what can an average person do? And one of the stories came from a lady who works in our church who said she preps her daughter about how to shop at the mall. If you don't touch anything unless you plan to buy it. If you pick something up and you don't buy it, take it to a clerk to put it back so that you're not accused of shoplifting. And I've never told my kids that. You know, a good friend of mine, Sam, talked about how his dad taught him what to do when you get stopped. Like if you get stopped in a car, what do you do? And Sam, you know, as a 16-year-old black kid said, oh, well, I get my wallet and I get my license or whatever, my registration. And his dad was like, yeah, and now you just got shot. You put your hands on the steering wheel, you wait for someone to approach, you do everything they tell you to do. And I'm sitting here thinking, I mean, I have 3 kids that I've recently taught to drive. I never taught them that. That was never even in my, it's so far out of my context. And I want to understand that better because I feel like I want to defend you. I want to defend this moment. We shouldn't have to teach our kids that. And I don't know what to do to change that. So that's a big part of the reason I want us to like throw these kinds of stories on the table, right? Like watching Arab Americans be pulled off airplanes after 9/11. I was on a plane where somebody came in who was clearly Middle Eastern, and just the whispering and the grossness of that moment was palpable. And I just don't I want to fix that. I don't know how to fix it. I don't know what to do with it. Sorry, I keep ranting, mainly because I don't know what else to do. Zoran, it's, again, to my, to the differences in how we grow up, right? It has never dawned on me, oh, I couldn't take this up the chain because the people up the chain might not share my experience.
Yeah, I looked, let me start by saying, like, I don't really promote the looting, especially scheduled looting. It's getting to the point where it's being scheduled. Sorry. So that's just not my deal. But what happened in Minneapolis, the looting based off of rage, I don't know. Just gonna
I
leave
get
it.
Yep, I know.
I don't
either.
But like scheduled looting, no, I don't get down. Here's the funny thing. The big thing about this is let's say that when the looting stops, the big thing for me is don't stop talking about it now. Don't make this enough. Don't just swipe under the table now. Let's focus on the looting now. It's over. No. Life's still gone. So when the looting's over, we get past all this and people start, doing what they got to do. Keep talking about it. I tell all my friends in my community, hey, keep posting about it. Don't let it go, because questions may get asked to me. All right, well, let's say the looting didn't happen, and let's say it was a peaceful protest. Okay, and let's say we protested, and that's still happening right now. I tell you when I tell you about going up the chain, you go all the way up the chain. You ever looked at the Supreme Court and what it looks like? Does it look like America to you? Look at a picture of it. It's kind of funny. It's the same thing that we experience right now, which, again, I'm glad that women are up there. Women are up on the Supreme Court. But if you look at the Supreme Court and you take the women out, 5 or 6 white guys, 1 black dude, right? Does he feel outnumbered? And I'm not saying that that's the case, but I'm just saying things look the same all the way up, right? So you get yourself all the way up, they still look the same. And what is it going to take for African Americans to get opportunities, for Arabics to get opportunities, for America to look the way it's supposed to look, right? We think of O.J. Simpson. O.J. Simpson, back in the day, went to California because it was more diverse. He had a better chance of playing football, right? When is America going to start looking like that all the way up the chain, so that it's even, and that it doesn't have to be so angry where we have to wait and think about, should the police officer be put in jail? We got to think about it for that many days. Well, should he? Or a bunch of police officers, again, I get that they needed to protect him for his life, and that was the wrong way about going about it, but have to protect him that long. It should have been automatic. Boom. This is all over national news. This was wrong. He's got to go now. We'll make but America doesn't look like that. It starts down here where we're all at, and as you go up, it looks the way that it's always looked for decades and decades and decades, lopsided. And my question is not like, again, I come from a mom that really did her thing. Woman, African-American vice president, all odds against her. She did it. She made it, right? I'm not looking for a pity party, but what sort of opportunities can Afro-Americans and Arabics get to be on high platforms, so that when we have conversation and debates, it's healthy and everybody's coming from a different generation, a different background, not the same sort of thing at all times. Sorry, my fists are clenched. My bad. I'm getting a little, let me slow down. But does that make sense? It's the same.
Yeah.
It's, to me, my biggest thing is I'm just looking up the chain. When this is over, when the looting is done, don't stop talking about it. But how is it going to get fixed? And it's going to have to be, and I don't know how to say this, but I don't know where we're going to start, because the top, in any company, in any business, any small business, they always say, and you hear it, the top down, right? Whatever the top looks like is what it's going to affect going down in the business. That's what's going to affect your business. If they're on the same page, if they've got the right morals or agreements, they're going to go. Well, look at our top down, Supreme Court. Right? Again, I'm not calling these individuals racist. By no means am I.
I get that. I hear exactly what you're saying, Zoran.
It doesn't look the same as what America looks right now. So.
I agree with Zoran that the conversation has to continue. I think it's very helpful if it can come, if we as minorities can come from a place of emotional intelligence, of intercultural sensitivity, because I've had conversations numerous with my white friends, and on the one hand, some of my white friends are stuttering and stammering and going, I'm sorry. I don't even know what else to say, Danette. I'm sorry. And then there are some who I'm very grateful have knocked on my office a couple of years ago, I think when the Charlotte thing happened. And at the time I was the only person of color on staff, and she just knocked on my door and she just said, "Hey, Danette, I just wanted to check on you and to see how you're doing." And I was so conditioned going back to Zoran's point about being outnumbered, and not even in a negative way. I love where I work, and I love my crew. I love my colleagues, but so conditioned to internally process these things about race and culture. When she said, I want to see how you're doing, I didn't know what she meant. And she said, I watched the news. Well, then I started crying. And she said, Danette, I don't relate. I just want you to know I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And we had a very precious conversation. Now, a couple of years later, after Ahmaud Arbery's death, different coworker, same thing. And I want to say to my precious white friends, that is powerful. And as a people who say we follow Jesus, I'll just tell you right now, I might sound like an old lady. I make no apology. No looting. I don't care if it's scheduled or not. If it's not on the schedule. When I was a kid, I shoplifted. It wasn't on the schedule, but it was always appealing. But because it propagates the stereotype, and I see, especially in a situation like this, the looting, the violence, the tension is understandable. The anger is absolutely unapologetically understandable, but the crime, whether it's perpetrated by Antifa or within a crowd and spitting at the cops, all that does is propagate the stereotype, and it doesn't help our cause. I think very few people even know who George Floyd's mother's name is, or Ahmaud Arbery's mother's name, and Floyd's sister, because his mother's passed. So you get the point. I feel like the violence and the looting causes us to miss the point and causes the conversation to become completely different.
I do think, from my perspective, for the first time ever, I get it. Like, it feels to me like when you're trying to teach your kids, you're like, the stove is hot, the stove is hot, the stove is hot, don't touch that stove, the stove is hot, right? And, they just keep going for it, they keep going for it, so finally you have to slap their hand, right? And it feels a little bit like that. Like, listen, we've said, stop killing us. Please stop killing us. You better stop killing us. And now I feel like we're shaking. I feel like with the looting and the violence, the violent demonstrations are shaking. Somebody say, I said stop doing this to me. And so I get that. I'm not excusing it. I don't know if it's the best way to do it. I don't even feel like I get a vote in whether or not it's the best way to do it.
Darren. That is legitimate. And I have heard that too. And it is. That anger is legitimate. Like, you've told us for decades, don't do it that way. Don't do it that way. Do it nicely. Say it nicely.
Yeah.
Well, we try. So the anger is absolutely legitimate.
Which furthers the point of what I'm saying earlier is like, hey, say it nicely, say it nicely. Say it nicely to who? Up the chain. You know what I mean? Like, that's all I'm saying. I agree with you that, believe me, looting is not I'm just not that way. I wouldn't. But I just have to have some, when I think of it most recently happened in Ferguson, right, it was more contained just to St. Louis, right? It didn't spread. Now this time it's, so that squeeze mechanism of like shaking Darren is exactly right. But I guess my question, not my question to anybody, but just always my question is like, yeah, you hear it all the time when you're outnumbered. Hey, we're supposed to act this way, and we're supposed to, you're not supposed to be loud like that. Okay. And and if this is something that just ain't happening the first time, this is 100. I mean, like, we're on decades of this. Well, then what else are we supposed to do? Yeah. Right. And then who else are you supposed to say it to when it doesn't look the same?
Yeah. Tania, I feel like you've been waiting to jump in on something.
Well, yeah, I'm like, ooh, that's a great point. That's a great point too. I feel like we talked a lot about like how it kind of got here and how the feelings progressed so much. And I feel like when I look at it, I get frustrated at the fact that like racism has become so normal that it's a joke to a certain extent. Like when I watch TV, there's so much like comedic lines about like, oh, well, what do you expect? They're Black. Or like, oh, of course she's going to say something because that's what we think of Black people. And so it's this normal level of baseline that I think when we say it wasn't that bad, it stems from like that fact that it's normal in society. And when people look at it of the line of like, what's normal? Like, okay, so you got called the N-word. That's not that bad, right? Because you could have been shot. So someone like pushed you and was angry with you. It's not that bad because like somebody could have screamed at you in front of your children and humiliated you. So that like that level is there. And I think constantly in our minds, when you are the only minority or the only Black person in a room, and when you do go to the authority, like Zorn said, it's dismissed because people are constantly communicating it's not that bad. So I think we internalize it and we keep it because what we're comparing it to is much worse. And I think a part of it, maybe the next step is removing the shame from having conversations of I'm offended. Instead of like me going to a person and saying, hey, it makes me really uncomfortable that you constantly make comments about my hair, right? And then that turns into like, well, don't change your hair if you don't want me to comment on it, which is, that just shut the door. And then if I go to somebody else and I'm like, can you believe that they said that? And they're like, well, at least they didn't call you like, it could have been worse. So it's, I think taking out that like defense mechanism when it comes to having to justify, because nobody wants to be called a racist, but there are actions out there that are so blatantly biased that it's hard to move past that. And it's like, I can't tell you how I feel about something and we can't have a great dialogue if you're not willing to accept that there's a clear bias in this conversation. And then telling me to pacify myself by saying it's not that bad. It's kind of a comfort for, I would say for myself, like that's become a comfort in part of my life of being like, okay, I could focus on this and focus on the fact that no one helped me and no one stood up for me, or I can walk away saying it's not that bad, move forward, move on with my life. And then it builds up to this anger of where I get to a certain point and I'm seeing people that look like me dying. I'm picturing myself in that situation. I'm picturing my friends in that situation. And I'm going, okay, it seems like everybody's saying it's not that bad again. And it brings up that like that emotion and that feeling of like, no, it's awful. It's terrible. And we had steps not to get here, but somebody didn't want to be offended. And so they never opened up the conversation to go deeper. They never opened up like that pathway to talk about like, why am I offended by this? Why are you offended by what I just said to you? I didn't mean that in any which way. And so I think that like, if we could take it a couple steps back, or if we could move forward and kind of before we go to something that you think or that someone thinks is so mundane that a person of color or a person that's different from you comes and says, hey, why'd you say that? Or why did you make that comment? Or that sounds really weird. Even if it's like another white person who's like, I don't really think that sounded right. Instead of being like, oh no, that's fine. I'm okay with it. They know, or I don't need to explain myself, or I don't need to have that conversation. I think taking shame out of the offense of being biased, we all have biases. That's a natural part of being a human. It's what we've been exposed to. It's what we're around. It's the way we're raised. It's like the voices of our parents, the voices of our friends, they build our perception of the world. And we do have to counteract a lot of that most of our life of like, oh, that doesn't match up to what I heard as a child is not a reality as an adult. And being open to say that sometimes my world can shatter a little bit so that it can get bigger opens up a conversation of like, okay, how do I contribute to this less? How do I make it comfortable for people to be frustrated without enraging people to a point of just such like tearful anger? And that starts with taking out shame.
How do you do that?
Yeah.
I agree with you. Like, I mean, I think one of my questions for you guys is how many of you have had friends who've had white friends who have ever said, share with me your experience or tell me how to have this conversation with you, or Tania and Zorn, I remember us having a very distinct conversation in my office when I think was probably the first real intentional help. I want to understand better And I don't want to unintentionally say something biased or racist or what I don't want to accidentally say something that offends you and not even know I'm doing it. So like as you're talking about that, I'm just like I agree that that's the key, and also the up the chain part. But I don't know how we do that. And I will tell you, like, there have been multiple times, especially since moving to Chicago, because while we are a very diverse city, we're still a very segregated city.
Mm.
And there's a lot of racism in Chicago, regardless of how many people of color and of all nationalities that live here. And I've heard multiple conversations where I was like, ooh, that makes me feel itchy. Like they didn't just come out and use the N-word or, say something just blatantly off the chain, because clearly I feel like I would immediately call that out and have. But that felt a little racist, or I don't think we handled that the way we should have, and I feel shame just about those moments of not saying right then, why would you say that? What difference does it make that he was black, or whatever? And so how do we do that? How do we as white people have a conversation that is not off-putting or awkward or weird? How do we approach people of color and say, help me understand that better? And how do you help us remove shame from that conversation when I do say something that, when I do over compliment your hair and you have to say, I really wish you wouldn't do that, how do I walk away from that conversation and go, oh, I understand her better, and not, oh, I screwed that up? Does that make sense?
Yeah. In my experience, I love when someone comes up to me and says, hey, I really don't know how to handle this. Or like, I had a conversation with a colleague a while ago who said, hey, this is really confusing for me. Some people like to be called Black. Some people like to be called African Americans. How do I navigate that? I don't want to offend someone. And first it took me off guard, like similar to how Danette said, like somebody coming up to you and you're the only one that's been in that situation, and you're processing through all these filters. That's like, am I the only Black person that to ask this question to? This feels like I'm on the spot right now. I don't understand why you would come. We've never spoken. But then landing on being like, actually, that's not a bad question. And if you were to ask anybody, I'm glad that you're asking me. I'm glad that you came up to ask the question rather than make the assumption. And we ended the conversation with being like, honestly, the whole point of that question, which is great, is that you have to see that Black people are all different. And so a conversation with me is not going to get you the answer, but you asking the question opens this door for you. When you speak to someone that's Black, ask them, how do you like to be addressed? Are you African American? Are you Black? Like if I say I like to be, I don't think about it. Either one, it doesn't matter. It still means my skin tone and how you describe me. But someone has a very distinct way that they like to be described. But the whole essence of that is be uncomfortable. Like you talked about, like, I don't want to start an awkward conversation. I don't want it to get weird. It's going to get weird, and let it get weird, because like what you're processing, the person that you're speaking to is also processing of whether like, should I be offended, or do I help this person, or like, is this going to end in a good way? And I think that's the part of like, now I've had a lot of friends who've reached out to me, and they've been like, hey, how can we talk about this? Like you said, Darren, like, how can we talk about this? How can we address this? What can we do better? And I'm like, 3 years ago, like even 2 years ago, no one has ever reached out to me to ask me, like, how can I see you better? How can I help you better? Or like, can we have a conversation about race? Because I've never had that conversation before. And just being open to it being awkward, I think is the key of like, let it get weird. It's going to. It's fine.
I mean, I'm down for weird. So
Yeah.
I think I probably got that cornered, actually. So
I actually had a funny conversation. It was we had a foster son that came in, and he happened to be Black, and his name was Omere with an apostrophe over the E. So we're like, shoot, we don't know how to pronounce his name. So we had to pull one of my Black friends aside. Hey, is it Omari or is it Omir or is it, but it's just one of those things where you have to be uncomfortable. Like, but I think, you know, the starting place is, man, race can be fun. Culture is fun. You know, I think a lot of people want to say, okay, it's too PC to talk about race. I love talking to people who are even, especially from immigrant families, because sometimes you're like, hey, is this an immigrant thing or is this a cultural thing? Like, what is it? Like, you know, it's just funny. For example, I have family members that wrap their remote controls in saran wrap, you know. So, and that's something that's not just in my family, but it's prevalent in a lot of Chinese families. You know, that's just
Wait,
funny
why?
nuances.
I want to know about that. Why is that?
I think it has something to do with just the I don't want to say poverty mentality, but because they want to savor something that they worked hard for.
Okay.
So things like that, yeah, that it is. It's funny when you figure out, hey, you can talk about race and some of the nuances. It can be funny, and it doesn't have to be all political all the time or PC all the time. It's fun. Rush Hour, for example, you know, where it's a buddy cop film, you know, learning about culture. That's funny.
I think like Ken said, it can be fun, but at the end of the day, the only way that we're going to be able to do this is having our school and our kids learn about it, and not because 90%, no, most people are scared of an awkward conversation, and that's just the way that they're wired. Most people are scared to be the first to talk about it, and they need that reassurance, you know. And some people like weird, and I'm with Tania. I'm glad that some people want to ask questions, but at the end of the day, it's an unknowing or unknowledged. If we would dig in more into our schools and have these conversations of different heritage, you know, and different backgrounds, it opens the door to have those conversations, because school is the first place where you come together and you learn. And you when you go to that classroom, now you want to ask, hey, why is Tania's hair braided like this, or why did she change it? Oh, okay, I learned this in school in class. And you know, that to me goes back to the same thing of the police officers: unknowledge, not knowing, not fully educated in the laws and the Protect and Serve Act and the de-escalating scenarios and how to do that well. It always has to end up going all the way to a white shirt sergeant who knows the full rules and knows, you know, that takes too long. So I'm with all you guys. I love the funness of it, and I love the questions, but I do think that we just got to start putting this in schools more and in colleges more, and the conversations will come up naturally, and they'll just happen.
Yeah, I was doing some research and stuff, and that's why, man, just seeing, I feel like in American history, especially, that racism is in there, especially against Black people. Even looking back to the disparity of, I was just looking at this, I think it was for the net income for families. The average net income for a Black family is about $17,000, and the net income for a white family is $171,000. So then I was doing some more research, and they were talking about it was because of, you know, obviously slavery and not allowing people to own property and stuff. I mean, it even goes back to just recently, a decade ago, 15 years ago, where banks weren't giving loans to the same rate as to minorities, more specifically Blacks. And then they talked about even 40 years ago where they said, hey, they didn't want Blacks in neighborhoods. And there were different ways, even though it was illegal, but different ways to convince Blacks not to come into neighborhoods because it will lower their property value. So that's ingrained in the culture. And that's why when we talk about what's interesting is, since a lot of us are minorities, like we kind of understand that, because we've been exploring what it looks like to have privilege or no privilege. And to everyone else, if you will, it's like, it's a shock for them. Wait, this has happened. Yeah, it's been happening. And the reason why it's a shock and no one wants to talk about it, if you will, our white friends, is because people have started just processing that now without knowing that, oh, this has been there in all of history.
All along. Yeah.
All along, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I've shared this with you guys yet. My roommate in college was black, one of my best friends. Um, I'm not sure if we ever had a real conversation about race ever, because it just didn't come up. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't weird. We lived together. He taught me some like cooking things I didn't know that, you know what I mean? Like it just never came up. It was not awkward. It wasn't weird, and it was not a thing. But also now that we're older, we've had some conversation. I'm like, this guy was suffering lots of discrimination that I was clueless about, because I didn't ask. And because, Zoran, to your point, because we don't teach it, we don't talk about it, and because not every place we are reflects the melting pot, right? Like, it's a lot to think about.
To ask
Well, we
questions,
don't.
I think is crucial. I think that's, you're asking, Darren, how do we have that conversation? And it's already been alluded to. For our white friends to even ask the questions. And I think as people of color, we cannot punish them because they say it wrong or ask it wrong. I had more than one friend saying not so many words. Even today, one of my girlfriends said, I do feel like darned if I do, darned if I don't. If I don't say anything, I'm criticized. If I do say something, I might be criticized because I'm saying it wrong. And so we just, especially as Christ followers, we've got to show the same grace that we want, and also not the same stereotypes. I know the black police officers in Lincoln, they're speaking up, and they're just as angry as the protesters. And as our chief of police, who is white. And so we do have to, there's a tension, in this conversation. And we've all said, embrace the awkward. We all agree with that. We have to embrace a little bit of tension too. And so that's just a thought. And I'm smart enough and old enough to know I'm not going to speak for all multiracial people, all black people, all Choctaw people. And I appreciate what Tania said earlier, because you can ask, you can ask several people of color the same question. You might get a different answer depending on what side of the country they're from, or depending on if they were adopted, if they were raised in a white neighborhood, black neighborhood, you get the point.
Which means just keep asking the question of everyone, right? So I asked Tania, and then maybe I also ask you, Danette, and then I ask Kinston, who's my college roommate, and I just keep asking the question so that I have a broader context. It's not a one answer fits all.
Yeah, because typically a lot of the times people say, well, I have a black friend or my cousin, who married a black person, so I know their perspective. Yeah, you have to know, the different experience. Everybody's laughing because that's always the excuse, right?
I'm sorry, that's my favorite line.
Yeah,
that's my
I have a black friend.
Hey, hold on 1 second. Hey, I got my black friend over here. He has said was.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So what would you guys say to, I work primarily with teenagers, and I just feel like a lot of this conversation is we need to be having this with our kids, right? We need to be having this with Gen Z. They're the change agents. Now, it's not to say there's not a lot of reform and change and that needs to happen before they rise to power, so to speak. But I feel like it's going to start with our kids and teaching our kids better. So what would you say to Generation Z, to the kids who are, 12 to 20, about how to advocate from our place of privilege? Because I do have a place of privilege. I didn't realize that. The more that has come to me, and honestly, the more injustice I've seen, you guys know this, I've said it to each of you. I want to fight. I want to do something. I can't rely on a social media post or a hashtag to make my point. I want skin in the game, and I want to teach my boys to have skin in the game, and I want to help educate my student ministry to have skin in this game, because nothing changes without that. Nothing changes with a hashtag. And but I don't know how to, especially as a white guy, I don't know how to help them do that. So what would you say if you were talking to my student ministry about racism and where to start?
It may sound kind of surfacey, but I would just say celebrate the differences, right? Like, I see the difference in the Hispanic culture, and I see the difference in the Black culture. And when you really begin to immerse yourself into those cultures, some of those traditions, some of what comes out of there is just so cool. Like, we have some really good Japanese friends. And when you get into the culture and why things are a certain way, number one, it's fascinating. But number two, you really begin to understand who they are, why they think the way that they think, etc. So I think a first step is not seeing people as, you'll hear people say, well, I don't see color. I get where they're coming from, but it's the, no, I see you for who you are, and I want to celebrate that difference, because that is a complete 180. And I'll take my wife as an example there. She's white. And when she started coming around my family, she was like, whoa, what is going on here? Number one, your family's so close. I don't understand just the tight knit, because I probably won't talk to my dad for another 2-3 weeks here. Whereas, no, I'm talking to my parents every day. The food is unbelievable. The traditions are unbelievable. When she began to immerse herself with my family, she began to understand the way that we operate and why we operate the way that we do. So, so if you can just start with kids, just say, hey, celebrate the differences. And if that means just going to your friend's house that maybe smells a little funny because of something that they're cooking, so be it. But that's your first step to understanding on who they are on a much deeper level.
And I think as Christ followers, I want to celebrate what heaven looks like. And the Bible is so clear, every tribe, every nation. And that's one of the things that I want to say, and I do say to middle schoolers and high schoolers, that's what heaven looks like. And so it behooves us to reach out to people of different colors and to have, as we've said, the awkward conversation, if it is awkward, or the curious conversation, even better, because that's what heaven's going to look like. And so I'd like to have a taste of it here on earth, but I know I have to be intentional about it. And again, asking those questions. I mean, I would love to think that, I'm multiracial, so I'm certainly have a lot of intercultural savvy and sensitivity. Well, no, I have to learn, just like everybody else, about other cultures. And so I want to stay curious, as Steve Jobs used to say.
Good. What else? What else do I need to tell teenagers?
Yeah, I like what you said. Who's that? Zoran?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I like what Danette said. What is just definitely be curious, and one phrase that always came up is this idea of melting pot. But I remember a teacher corrected me when I was younger, and they say, "Hey, we're not a melting pot. We're a mixed salad," and that always got me thinking, why is that? And they said, I started realizing, well, it's because when you're a melting pot, then everybody realizes, you have to be and look a certain way to be American. When you say melting pot, automatically it's, hey, well, you're gonna have to be whitewashed. And that's that kind of, then you go into this, I don't see color. And when you don't see color, that's stripping everybody else's culture, but the white American experience. And so that's stuff where we have to even think about language. And again, not saying we're PC, but we think, oh man, language matters. We continue to be curious, continue to question everything and why, and I think the reason why, especially with today, why people are really reflecting on this, especially with Ahmed and Floyd, is that, man, people are realizing, man, if I were in their shoes, I wouldn't be treated that same way. People are starting to really think through that. Man, that's wrong, you know? And so that's that same thing when you start questioning this stuff. And I also love what you kind of said. We all have biases, every single one of us. We all need to change. And I think that's one of those baselines we can say, hey, and I'll just say some people may need to change much more than others, but we all still need to change. And so I think we all can humbly come down and say, wow, every single one of us has made mistakes. Every single one of us has have these tendencies or issues. So how can we succeed together?
So another question, maybe more inflammatory. I don't want it to be, but it might be. So right now, I mean, tensions are high, right? And they should be. How do I use whatever privilege I have, realized or not, to defend my friends and to defend George and Ahmad and the list of 1,000 names? Like, what do I do now in addition to or beyond the hashtag? I mean, I love to ask questions and all that, and I know we should be doing that.
You've done, Darren, you've done it even in starting this conversation. And there's this tension between an extreme reaction on the part of white people who feel like they need to apologize for everything their ancestors ever did. And I saw a video of a Black protester, and she panned the camera to two white protesters spray painting a building, and she said, hold up. She said, stop that. We didn't ask you to do that. We do not need you to spray paint buildings and do this. We're out here peacefully protesting. You're going to leave, and everybody's going to think that we did that. And so that's one extreme. The other side of it that I very much appreciate, and here again, this is a tension, is when white men, particularly in authority, will speak up intelligently with emotional intelligence and articulately speak up and not be defensive, but just call it for what it is. This is blatantly wrong. This was murder. And I have a former coach who did that, and I messaged him and I said, thank you for this. He wrote a long, and I know you can get to where there's too much noise, and especially on social media, but for me, it does matter. It does mean something when my white pastor goes on his Facebook Live devotional every day and prays about this and brings it up and says, church, we must do better. Everybody expects, the Black pastors to do that, which obviously we should, but, and I think the extreme of white silence is white violence. I don't know about all that, but I will say silence can be culpable. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yes. I don't want to be silent, for sure. I feel like I had a conversation with some friends of mine this morning, all white, and all of us are like, we just feel like we can't do enough. And and part of that's because we don't know what to do. And part of it is because, I think you're right. I don't remember which one of you talked about how this one's different. Like, we all watched that and went, oh God, no, we can't, no. And so I feel like, there's I feel like we have a moment here to, at the very least, open the conversation, which is what I hope we're doing with this conversation and this call. But also, I want to admit to you guys that I don't know if there's more I should do. And if there is more I should do, what that is. Like, I appreciate you, Danette, saying, like, this is a start, this is good. And I love it. And I want it to be a start, and I want it to be good, but I don't want it to stop. And so I'm just asking, and maybe this is all there is for now, but I'm asking that if there's more that you would say, here's another thing, I think. Here's another step you could take. Here's another thing you could do. I want to know what that is.
I think for me, Darren, when I look at it and I'm like, let's picture a perfect world. And in this perfect world, what would I like to see people do, taking out, like, what is the impossible? And I think through something that my mom would say jokingly, where she's like, there are rooms that we'll never be in, meaning like Black people or people of color. And those rooms are rooms filled with white people having a conversation about a decision that affects a Black person or that affects Black culture or Black people. And we're not going to be in those rooms. We're not going to be invited to that. And it's, if you are in that room, if you look around and you realize that you're in that moment, in my perfect world, it's asking yourself, what can I do that benefits a minority in this situation, even if it makes me uncomfortable, but creates the best situation, creates the best answer. It's also maybe like, it's hard when you're programmed this way, but looking at someone and not assuming a threat automatically. And I know that that is deeply rooted in a lot of people. So it's hard to say like I'm terrified of tigers. And so if I look at a tiger, I'm going to be afraid. And there's relevancy to that because of what I've seen and what I know and all these different things. But at the same time, it's understanding that like, as a Black person or as a person of color, a minority in general, not looking at something that you don't understand and automatically feeling fear, or addressing that fear and asking yourself, like, what validity do I have to say that this is a threat? Or what information do I have that is beyond a personal belief, that is clear evidence that shows that this person hasn't earned something, should be assumed that they are a threat or a thief, or just something that is out of the norm of just giving a person the benefit of the doubt. And I've been thinking about that a lot, of like, there's a lot of conversation that Black people just don't get the benefit of the doubt when they enter a room, when they enter a conversation, when they enter a situation, that the automatic assumption is that you are wrong or you are bad, prove me wrong. And so I think it's asking ourselves, like,
so good.
Okay, how do I not automatically see this person as a threat? And that's not going to come from like, oh, this person's bad, I shouldn't have thought that, now I feel guilty about thinking that, and then staying in that moment. It's, oh, I thought this person's bad, why did I think that? Did they do something that showed me that? And then working backwards in our own brains of like, oh, okay, well, how about I give them the benefit of the doubt to
rewire.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like rewiring ourselves, of asking ourselves, even tuning out what you hear. Because I think for a lot of teenagers, a lot of experience hasn't really happened yet. And that's not saying like there's immaturity there. It's saying that just life experience, when you're on your own and you're paying your own bills, or you're driving your own car, and you're interacting with a lot of people as a solo individual, you have more experiences that could include offensive natures or racism in general. And for a lot of people, they haven't experienced that. So if you're talking amongst yourselves, you may not have that reference yet. But as you're building from what you hear from your family, or what you hear from your friends, or what's just normal to you, of asking yourself, why do I think that way? And not letting your guilt or your confusion overshadow your reprocessing what you could do better in a situation.
That's just a good life skill, a good human skill, regardless of what the topic is. Yeah.
And I told y'all, just give her 5 minutes and it boom. Only thing I want to say is, like, I just harp so much on what Tania said. If there's a group of one race in a room, call it. Call it. Don't do what, even to our detriment of just trying to fit in when you're younger. Don't do it. Don't call it right where it is when you see it. If two or three of you and you know that this is wrong, don't just fit in, especially all white folks in the room, or no matter what race it is. Just, I love that, Tania. Call it out. I just love everything that she's saying. That's great. But also, just another point, I'm going backwards a little bit, but Danette's point, like, I don't think that even African Americans know what to do right now. What to do is a conversation. I don't think that anybody has the answers right now. That's just my thought. And if they did, I think they'd come on out with it and we'd know. But so, don't be scared to have any sort of conversation with what's next or what you should do next, because I don't know either. I just know that we got to keep talking about it. That's all I know. And like Danette said, this is the first step.
Well, and we can look at Jesus. We can look at the way Jesus treated people. I tell girls all the time, if you want to know how a man should treat a woman, read the Gospels and see how Jesus treated women. Well, we can say the same thing about minority groups. we can see how Jesus treated people in the first place. And my encouragement to youth pastors or to any pastors is, don't wait till February when it's Black History Month to do a talk on Martin Luther King. Don't wait till May to, or Cinco de Mayo, that's the only time I learned about Mexican heritage when I was a kid. And yet here I was surrounded. Now, I shouldn't say that was the only time. That was the only time in school. But I would say in our church, we make it interweave these themes of biblical justice. And I intentionally say biblical justice, not just social justice, because, you said it. Hashtags don't, that's not the answer. And, everybody fancies themselves a little activist, but as Christ followers, we take the Jesus model of the way to treat people, and you can interweave it. We can interweave it into our small group talks, into our messages.
Good.
Luke 15. God left the 99 to go get the one. Thank you, Danette. Thank you.
Okay, so obviously this conversation is way broader than the hour or so we've been talking about it. So I know there is lots that we didn't cover. If there's one thing right now that you have not yet said, what is your unsaid thing that you want people to know? Whether that's an experience you had that you want to shine light on, whether that's advice that you have to give, or a challenge. What's one unsaid thing that you might say now?
I'm gonna leave it at this. When the looting doesn't become the forefront of the conversation, don't stop. I get it. Looting is the forefront of the conversation right now. And I have to step back because I don't support it. So I gotta wait but when that's over, go right back to where we was. Keep the same energy. Don't just sweep it under the rug when the looting's done. Keep the same energy as soon as the looting's done.
One thing I would encourage all of us, and I have to remember this too, when I came on staff at my church, I believe I was the first female pastor on our staff and the first person of color on our staff. Now, since then, there have been more women come on staff, more minorities have come on staff, a couple. But here's my point. I remember thinking to myself, I'm glad about this. This is great, but I don't necessarily want to, I want to be about my Father's business, my Heavenly Father's business. I don't necessarily want to be the representative for all Black people in America or all women in America. That's a bonus, but one of the things I've loved about being a writer is when I send an idea in and nobody knows, unless they know me, they don't know that they don't know what my hue is, my pigment is. So that leads me to think I want to stay in my lane. I cannot change the entire world and change everybody in every community, but I have, whatever my platform is, I have influence, and the Lord will open a door for broader influence perhaps, but I start here as opposed to, I don't know what to do, so I'm not going to do anything. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Very much so. Good. Nadeem, you're unmuted.
Yeah, I mean, you said it earlier, this one feels different. And even just saying that, in a lot of ways, it kind of makes me feel shameful because it never should have gotten here to begin with, And the fact that so many times we sweep this stuff under the rug, we just can't do that anymore. And so with that said, I fully agree with what Zoran said. The conversation cannot stop. Yeah, other stuff, the looting, whatever, the violent, that stuff is getting the attention right now. But and we've got to figure out how. And I think personally, I believe it starts in the home. It starts, for me personally, it starts with my 4 kids. If I hear something come up, I've got to nip it in the bud. I've got to have that conversation with them. I've got to take the initiative before something comes up to begin to have these conversations and lay that foundation so that as they get older, and like Tania said, they get out on their own and they begin to navigate, paying bills on their own and going out and finding their first, jobs, etc. The race issue for them, I don't want it to be an issue, right? I don't, unfortunately, it's probably going to be there, but can we take steps to make it better? 100%. And the way that starts is when the craziness dies down, that we keep the conversation going. 100% agree with Zoran on that one.
I think for me, something that I heard just recently, they said that the 90s generation, they said, was the last greatest generation. And the reason why was because there's a shared experience, Rugrats and Nickelodeon and everything. But now we've lost that because our worldview can be shaped by news stories and music according to our worldview. Does that make sense? So if we like something on Spotify, we just listen to that all the time. And I think that's leaked into news media as well, that you can find any source and any media out there to support your worldview. And so I think we have to be cautious with that as we're moving forward of, are we actually, just because we cite something doesn't mean it's true. And I'm not trying to, take out our foundation of what's true or not or anything, but I think it's just we act so much on emotion that we don't think logically through this stuff. And so just because we retweet or share something, it doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And it's unfortunate. And so it is so easy to find stuff that supports our worldview, but just really have an open mind. We know there's a race issue. We know there's inequality. Whether if a person's guilty or not guilty, we know there's an issue. So.
Tania, do you have anything?
I would say the one thing that I admire that a lot of, I think, kids are doing and a lot of people in general is research beyond like social media, beyond Facebook and Instagram, but actually going into history and looking at like what's happened in this city on this day and how did that affect like Black Americans, or how did that affect other minorities, what's going on. And I want to encourage people to do that more, of go in depth in this, understand the deep roots of it so that you can better say, okay, this isn't new. This isn't something that's different. This isn't even 100 to 50 years old. There's depth in this. And then the challenge of, I know everyone says like, be the change, which becomes so redundant because you're like, well, how do I become the change? And I think it's more when you're in that situation, because everyone gets there, whether you're Black, white, doesn't matter. We're always going to be in a situation where we have to make a decision, where we have to use our voice for something. And I would say, take that moment and take that situation and do it. Even if you're scared, even if you missed it, even if you didn't say something, it's okay to go back and say something. It's okay to follow up with someone. The challenge is just don't think that you've missed a moment to be a voice or to be an advocate, because just a sentence or a word has so much impact, even if it came a year later. Like, it's so much nice to hear from someone like, hey, a year ago, I didn't stand up for you, and I'm so sorry about that. And even going back to the person and saying, hey, a year ago, you were out of line. I just wanted you to know I felt that way. So yeah.
Great.
I think that's the challenge.
So good. Well, I know this conversation isn't over, but I think this phone call probably is getting there. I just want you guys to know how much I love and adore each of you. I know that it's not easy to like put your story out there necessarily, and certainly not in a time where things feel like there's a little bit of heightened emotion and all of that. And I appreciate your courage and your bravery. I'm just going to say to you, I'm sorry for being less aware, probably than I should be. And I may continue to have that apology. I want to learn. I want to be better. I want to defend my friends. I want to pay attention up the chain, Zoran, more than I have. But mostly I just want you to know that I don't care what color you are, what state you live in. I love you guys. And I'm so glad that God has allowed our paths to cross, and that in this and in lots of things, we stand with linked arms. So I love you guys. I appreciate you. To those of you watching, thanks for watching. Don't just watch. Do something. Have a conversation. Get involved.